Welcome to Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto, the podcast dedicated to focusing on the truth that is always evolving within us and around us, where we explore the potentiality of truth as a highly esteemed value at a time in history when most people have more on their plates than any one human should. If you're new to me, full expression is my jam. Some words people have used to describe me range from speaker, trainer, coach, healer, writer, spiritual advisor, teacher, podcaster, and someone even called me their soul Sherpa once. I'm less concerned with titles or labels and more interested in results, change, and creating a world we want to, can, and are proud to live in. A kinder, gentler, more curious, collaborative, reverent world where people respect each other's backgrounds, experiences, and truths. They trust in themselves, in life, and recognize that we need each other. And they know how to cultivate healthy relationships to true power, not the very unhealthy kind of power our current culture is predicated upon. Speaking of our culture, there's a lot of noise and ignorance in our current culture, and this show aims to cut through that by exploring the truths of a diverse range of incredible voices. From authors, artists, creatives, and educators to activists, speakers, and those in various scientific and esoteric fields, our guests hail from cultures and countries all over the world. We post a new interview every Monday, and if you want to keep up with the show notes and quotes from our guests, you can follow me on Instagram at Elizabeth D'Alto. You can expect a wide range of topics when you tune into this show. Everything from health, communication, money, success, parenting, desire, sex, love, and spirituality, to making pivots and transitions in life, and topics related to psychology, storytelling, gender and race issues, emotional intelligence, activism, advocacy, and much more. A few disclaimers. No episode of the show is meant for everyone, and every episode is meant for whoever needs it on the right day at the right time. Not all guest views will reflect my own, and that's intentional. We don't learn, grow, heal, or improve by staying in our comfortable bubbles with all of our people who look, think, or live exactly how we do. If you love what you hear and find it useful and inspiring, the best way to show your appreciation is to share the episode, subscribe to the show, and leave us a rating and review wherever you listen in from. Thank you so much for being here with me. Here we go. Hello, everybody. This is episode number 282 of Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto. As well, it is the second installment in a 6-week series called Journey into the Wild Soul. Now, before we dive into the episode today, I want to remind anyone who listens religiously, meaning you listen first thing on Monday when the episode comes out, that today is Monday, November 26th, which is Cyber Monday here in the US, and I've been running a Cyber Monday sale all weekend on 2 things. The first is Wild Soul Movement weekend workshops. There are 12 in 2019. The second is my new year-long women's circle, which is called Power, and that starts on January 3rd. When you join either today, you save some money. You can save $50 on workshops, which actually is more like saving $200 because I figured out how to knock $150 off the price point they were offered at in 2017 and 2018. So technically, the code saves you $50, but it kind of saves you $200. And then you save $111 on Power. I've priced both really generously because I want them to be accessible. And I actually received, this was so sweet, a few notes over the weekend from women saying they were in tears when they realized that they could afford one or the other or both, and I absolutely love that. So you can check out workshop details and the schedule at wildsoulmovement.com/workshops. And if you're doing that today, the promo code to save $50 is thankful. It's just the word thankful, and you want to make sure that you enter it in all lowercase letters. And if you want to learn more about Power 2019 and see if it's right for you, go to wildsoulmovement.com/Power 2019. That's wildsoulmovement.com/ and then the word Power 2019. And I want to let you know, I put a ton of time into making sure that that page especially is extremely thorough since it's a year-long experience. I also included 5 interviews with alumni of the original version of the program so that you can get some real insight into what the experience is like from students' perspectives, not just mine, because obviously I'm biased. So now on to the show. If you're just joining us, it's not necessary to go back to episode 1 in the series. While the episodes are designed to build on each other, I've also made sure that each stand alone and can be valuable out of order as well. What I want to do, though, is remind you of the intention of this Journey into the Wild Soul series. This is about reflecting on the year and perhaps years previous in your life so that you could leave the past in the past as we transition into a new year. As well, it's to invite you to consider if how you've been going about your growth, healing, and transformation is really effective, or if it's more performative, obligatory, inefficient, ineffective, or even just a distraction, or in some cases, an addiction. So this is about real deal empowerment, and to be clear, I'm not out here trying to empower you because I can't do that for you, but I am here to help you empower yourself. So that's what we're talking about during the 6-week series, and we're approaching it from different angles with the intention of helping you connect to the love and truth inside of you, which ultimately those two things are your power. Your power is rooted in those things. So to everyone who has joined the private Facebook group, I've been really appreciating your shares. In fact, a lot of people have mentioned this, that listening to the show in general, listening to this podcast in general, has helped them to discover so much about themselves and do things differently in their lives. And I love to hear that because, again, it's kind of the whole point. So if you want to join that Facebook group, it's free between now and December 29th. You can go to wildsoulmovement.com/pop-up-FB, as in pop-up Facebook. So again, that's wildsoulmovement.com/pop-up-FB. I also really have been appreciating the shares that have been going on around last week's questions. Last week, we talked a lot about patience and just looking at what's been working and what hasn't. So those reflection questions were what really worked and what didn't, or what's currently working and what isn't. What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about life? What did you learn about people? And what themes did you maybe intend for the year, or what themes emerged, and how did those themes serve you? So we kicked it off with some pretty in-depth questions. If you haven't dug in on those yet, you can go back anytime. That was episode number 281. And you can find that either in iTunes or wherever else you listen to podcasts. The show notes for that episode are at untameyourself.com/281. And this week's show notes will be at untameyourself.com/282. So today's topic is deep committed practice. Now, I know that doesn't sound sexy to most people, but trust me, it's literally the sexiest. And also, a heads up, I went full geek mode in this episode. Full, everybody. I wrote it all out. I'm going to reference a couple of resources that we'll put in the show notes, so you might want to listen to this one more than once because there are a lot of layers to it. And either way, I trust that you'll hear what you need to hear in the divine right timing of it all. So this week, there are just 4 reflection questions, and I'll give them to you now. I'll also repeat them at the end of the episode, and of course, they'll be posted inside the private Facebook group. Again, that's at wildsoulmovement.com/pop-up-FB if you want to see what others are sharing or share your own experience as well. So this week's reflection questions are, what is your current relationship to deep committed practice? Where in your life have you been avoiding deep committed practice, whether that's intentionally, and you know damn well you've been doing it, or unintentionally, which if it's unintentionally, by the end of this episode, you'll probably have a better idea of where that's happening if it is for you. The third question is, what impact has not having a deep committed practice had on your life? And how do you think a deep committed practice could benefit your life now? So deep committed practice, let's break down what it even means. The definition of practice is the actual application or use of an idea, belief, or method, as opposed to theories about such application or use. It's also repeated exercise in or performance of an activity or skill so as to acquire or maintain proficiency in it. So practice is about repetition. It's about showing up over and over and over and over again and getting better at something, going deeper into something. Doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's going to be fun all the time. Doesn't mean it's going to feel good. And I've known a lot of folks who are very knowledgeable. It's not hard to be knowledgeable, especially this day and age when literally all of the information of the world is at our fingertips. So knowledge is not necessarily how do I want to put this? Knowledge is not the biggest, most important thing, right? Actually, I saw someone post it online the other day. It might have been a woman named Stacy Jordan Shelton, who I like to follow on Facebook, and I follow her Patreon. It said, nobody cares how smart you are if you're a total asshole. So there's that. But here's the deal. Some people are very knowledgeable. They can quote and even deeply discuss the concepts and theories. They can have impressive conversations that really stimulate the mind. But when you look at how they're showing up in their lives and the results they're getting, the experiences they're having, how people are responding to them, it's clear that they're not putting all that knowledge into practice. So what that reveals is a real incongruence. Personally, I want people in my life who are practicing what they know and showing up in integrity, especially if they're preaching or teaching it. If you're out there talking about something and teaching it to other people, you better damn well be practicing that in your life. So put simply, practice is an integral part of real deal progress that lasts, that eventually becomes the change we want to see, period. So in the age of quick fixes and magic bullets, which is across all industries, we'll often hear that in reference to the weight loss or the beauty industry because it's rampant in those places, but we also see it in business, right? People want to make money and they want to make it fast. In some cases with no consideration for long-term sustainability, or in some cases, integrity, ethics, or moral implication, or the impact it's actually having on other people. We see it in the healing world. People abusing healing technologies, plant medicines, and more, turning them into escapes and addictions rather than deeply integrating after these experiences to reap the full benefits of an experience before they're off to another one seeking the next breakthrough. But breakthroughs don't always equal progress. They could be quite temporary if we don't take the time to really get the lesson, to really unpack the revelations, and adjust ourselves to the new awareness or consciousness that we've tapped into. So in a way, practice is about attunement. In our culture, we're all trying to fast forward all the time, right? Like we want something and we want it yesterday. But really, that fast forwarding, skipping steps, skipping the practice, the deep committed practice, is what keeps us in the hamster wheel. Because as we go, we're not developing the skills, practices, habits, capacity, and resiliency that are required for long-term results. We're not building the foundation. And deep committed practice is about building a foundation. Instead of just having these isolated, short-term experiences that might feel good, but don't necessarily have any kind of long-term benefit. Which brings me to a big part of deep committed practice, and that is the value of a container or multiple containers. So we can't talk about containers without talking about alchemy. So there are a few things alchemy requires to occur. They require the container, the thing to be alchemized, and the energy to create the alchemy. So as I was writing the content for this episode, I got curious about the deeper technicalities of alchemy, because what I just gave you is like a real light, sweeping overview of what goes into alchemy. So I got curious about the deeper technicalities. So I did what all modern people do. I turned to the most high and venerable Google machine, and I read through a few articles, feeling like my mind was being both challenged and activated. And maybe you can relate to the experience or maybe you can't. But sometimes when I read something and either have to look up words or like really take my time to get it and take it all in, I feel kind of shocked. Like at 35, how am I seeing words I've never seen before? But also, that aspect of having to really concentrate on how the words are working together to make sense of the information is something that we don't necessarily have to do too often anymore, because so much, especially online content these days, is built for quick and mass consumption to kind of keep you hungry so you keep going for more. So to be honest, as I was reading through these articles, I was a little bit in awe. Because instead of, kind of feeding into that shortening attention span, these articles kind of took me back into like the depth, opening me back up, and I was really enjoying that. So there's one, I'm going to read you a good chunk of it. And the reason I shared about that like mind expanding experience I just had is because even as I read this article to you, you might want to rewind and re-listen a few times, or you might want to come back later, and it might require some extra focus and concentration. You might want to listen to it more than once. So I'm going to put a link to this article in the show notes, which again are at untameyourself.com/282. It's from a blog called Awaken the Dream by Paul Levy. And he's specifically talking about spiritual alchemy. And what I dug about it most and makes it most relevant to this podcast series is the real exploration between light and dark, the conscious and the unconscious. And also I poked around a little bit about Paul Levy. On the surface, I did not find anything problematic about him, so I feel comfortable to include this article in the episode. So as I read this to you, I'll also stop here and there to inject how this is relevant here in the context of what we're talking about today, deep committed practice. So here we go. He wrote, in my previous article, The Sacred Art of Alchemy, I contemplate how the unconscious part of ourselves becomes the raw material, the prima materia, out of which the alchemical gold, the philosopher's stone, which is none other than the enlightened mind, is refined and revealed. This has everything to do with transmuting our lower, primitive, instinctual selves into a more purified state. The goal of the spiritual art of alchemy is to unite the opposites, to integrate the conscious and the unconscious, to unlock the light encoded and imprisoned within the darkness. The light within the darkness itself is known as the lumen naturae, the inner living light of primordial, ever-present, non-dual awareness itself, which is the light of nature that literally lights up the whole of creation in this and every moment. To see the light that is hidden in the darkness is to become conscious, which alchemically speaking frees the spirit that is hidden and trapped inside the materialized world. The art of alchemy itself is an expression that hidden in the darkness is light. The alchemists, Jung says, quote, discover that in the very darkness of nature, a light is hidden, a little spark without which the darkness would not be darkness. The lumen naturae is the light of the darkness itself, which illuminates its own darkness, and this light the darkness comprehends. That's in contrast to a light that, as the Bible says, shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. The lumen naturae, the light of lights, is a light that the darkness intimately recognizes as its own nature. The lumen naturae is the luminosity within the darkness recognizing itself as it illumes its own darkness. This archetypal experience of the luminescence of the divine being found in the translucent darkness is referred to in various mystical traditions by names such as the luminous darkness and the black sun. A light that doesn't go out, the lumen naturae pervades, infuses, and animates the physical world. Everything that arises in the materialized world is inseparable from and a modification of the lumen naturae. At the same time, being the light of non-dual awareness prior to consciousness, the lumen naturae inspires, elucidates, illuminates, and enlightens consciousness itself. Being non-dual, the lumen naturae non-locally and synchronistically configures co-arising events both in the physical world and reciprocally within the landscape of our minds as a way of revealing itself. So I'm going to take a pause to interject here for a moment. For those of you who listen to the podcast regularly, you hear me mention constantly, and also on social media, how much I love synchronicity. And to me, synchronicity is is exactly what he's talking about here, right? It's that bridging over, it's that intersecting of, moments in time that might be happening at various points in time and space, at varying degrees of awareness in the conscious and the connection of the unconscious mind. And it just feels almost nothing short of miraculous, at least mystical and mysterious when it happens. So back to the article. The lumen naturae inspires our unconscious and animates our dreams. Alchemical text says, he learns the lumen naturae through dreams, and as the light of nature cannot speak, it buildeth shapes in sleep from the power of the word of God. And again, whenever I mention God on this show, feel free to put that in whatever context you vibe with, whether that's the universe, whether it is an actual God, whatever it is that, you believe in and feel like is the powerful force of the universe or the energy that supports you. So it says here, the Logos, the creative word of God, is also equivalent to the Lumen Naturae. Not limited to giving shape solely to our night dreams, the Lumen Naturae also interpenetrates and materializes itself into and shapes our shared waking dream, literally orchestrating the situations we find ourselves in during the course of our life. Because it's not bound to the laws of linear time in third-dimensional space, the Lumen Naturae is always extending and expressing itself everywhere. The Lumen Naturae is not the light that we see, it is the invisible light by which we see, and that it's the non-dual light of sentient awareness itself. Here's what I love about this. It kind of speaks to the more divine essence of our intuition, right? So I talk a lot about embodiment in my work, and we'll spend next week's third episode in this series is all about embodiment. But one of the things that I describe when I talk about learning to speak your body's unique language of the senses is that that's actually how God, the universe, whatever that animating energy of life is, that's how it communicates with us. And that's exactly what this is talking about here. It is a light which inspires the world, and yet it has no objects separate from itself. The Lumen Naturae is not a light separate from darkness. For the alchemist, darkness wasn't merely an absence of light, but a quality that was an expression of the indwelling light of being that has no opposite. Shadows themselves are nothing other than an expression of light. Light itself contains and generates shadows. Where there are no shadows, there is no light. Establishing ourselves in the viewpoint that can join the opposites, uniting the shadow and the light, is to not only possess, but to create genuine wealth within the core of our being. As Jung says, one who can join the shadow to the light is the possessor of the greater riches. Among its many names, the philosopher's stone is called the pearl of great price to signify its pricelessness, its preciousness, and its immeasurable value in all realms, both visible and invisible, outer and inner. And I'm going to pause here for a second to say that when they're talking about price and pricelessness and great riches, it's obviously not just monetary in nature. Back to the article. Human consciousness, Jung explains, is the only seeing eye of the deity. God has made man so that he might see in the darkness. This is kind of a big metaphor for our life, our life here on earth for sure. We are the instruments through which the Lumen Naturae illumines and realizes its own darkness, which is to simultaneously realize its light. The Lumen Naturae reveals itself in, as, and through the darkness. Just like light, the darkness itself is the unmediated crystallization and revelation of the non-dual light of the Lumen Naturae. We can unnecessarily limit ourselves by mistakenly thinking that illumination only means to see the light. Seeing our own darkness, our own shadow, however, is initiatory and thereby is another form of illumination. Jung makes this point by saying, not only darkness is known through light, but that conversely light is known through darkness. In becoming illuminated, the darkness illuminates us. In being seen, the darkness helps us to increase consciousness. In being made conscious, the darkness introduces us to the light of non-dual awareness, for without the darkness, we wouldn't have realized the light. This is similar to how reflections in a mirror seemingly obscure the silvered face of the mirror while simultaneously revealing it. At the quantum level, it becomes impossible to distinguish where light ends and darkness begins, as they reveal themselves to be indissolubly united, a true conjunction of opposites. So that's where I'm going to stop in that article. You can read the full thing at the link in the show notes if you want to. And what I really, really love about this more than anything is how deeply and meaningfully, and using several different examples, it emphasizes the importance of how the dark and the light, or the shadow and the light, or the conscious and the unconscious need each other to constantly be revealing the other to itself It's amazing. I know it can be a little bit of a brain buster. So you kind of got to like relax the brain a little bit and not like hone in so acutely on understanding what the words mean, but allow yourself. It's almost like allow yourself to receive it and just feel the truth in it. Okay? And so what does this have to do with deep committed practice? Let's ground this in and review what the point I was making previous to this was. I started with this because deep committed practice requires a container. And sometimes, like the article mentioned, the container contains itself. Like there are containers within containers, meaning sometimes you are the container, like when you're on your own doing your own work. And other times you're doing your work within a larger container, whether that's an intentional container, whether it's in a group or with a guide, a workshop, an experience, or whether it's just the container of your life. And so deep committed practice requires an intentional, a conscious container. So you can feel when there's a strong container for an experience and when there's not. In modern times, components to containers might feel like boundaries, agreements, shared intentions, just to be simple about it. For example, and I'll use an easy example that some of you can super relate to because you're in there. In the pop-up Facebook group that accompanies this podcast series, that's a container. That's a closed Facebook group. So energetically, it's creating a seal on an energetic experience that we've agreed to participate in together. And to fortify the container, I wrote agreements. And the first post in the group says, hey, agree to these agreements and read through this. And the reason we do that is because it creates safety and it guides the experience for everyone. It lets them know what they can expect, what isn't acceptable, and demonstrates care and respect for the space on both sides. On my side, the one who's creating and holding the container, and on the participant side, those of you who are in the container, having the experience, receiving the experience. What we're saying when we enter into the container and again, have some boundaries and have some agreements is that we're going to respect each other and that honor our shared focus and intentions. And these things aren't meant to be rigid, but rather to create lots of freedom within the container because once the agreements are set and the container is set, people don't have to worry about etiquette. They don't have to second guess themselves. They don't have to worry, ooh, I don't know if this is allowed here. It's very clear what is and what isn't welcome. The intentions aren't in question, and almost every potential violation imaginable has been thought of ahead of time and handled within the agreements. So people also know they can come in and be themselves. On a more esoteric level, there might be prayers and invocations to supportive energies or beings involved in containers. But ultimately, the container is the foundation for deep committed practice. So now I want to talk about the 5 components to deep committed practice. And these are based on my own experience and methodology and way of doing things. So these are not the be all and the end all. These are just my offering here. Some of these are also terms in my own lexicon from the Wild Soul Movement body of work, and some of them aren't. So the first one is patience. That's not my lexicon. That's just a word. And patience is something we talked about a good bit in last week's episode, so I don't really need to spend too much time on that, but patience just means taking your time, right? And being willing to wait for something to evolve in its own divine timing and nature and unfoldment, and not necessarily forcing things or jumping the gun or pushing or willing your way through something. So patience requires a cooperation with life's natural unfoldment of things as well. The second thing I call sacred restraint, and this is linked to patience. It's also consciously exercising self-control and discipline that isn't restrictive. And the difference between restriction and restraint is the energy of punishment. Both things are forms of limiting yourself, discipline, or control, but one is for a truly positive, healthy, empowering outcome that includes high self-regard and has that energy to it. It feels that way. The other, restriction, comes from low self-esteem, worth, or fear, a lower self-regard, and has that energy to it. For most people, what's on the other side of restriction is some kind of binge or pendulum swing in the opposite direction. What's on the other side of sacred restraint is a favorable, desirable outcome. Then there's holy consistency, which some of you have heard me mention before. And you can see how these things begin to weave into each other. The holy consistency is partially how we express and utilize sacred restraint. It's when we show up with an energy of devotion and commitment to cultivate habits and practices that nourish and support us. Often these things go against our ego desires, but they do align with our soul's desires. And I'll talk more about that in week 5 of the 6-week series. Then we have divine discernment. I love divine discernment. Embodiment is necessary here. I'm going to bookmark this one. I'll give you a brief overview, but I won't spend too much time on embodiment because it's actually the topic for next week's episode. But essentially, discernment happens in the body and judgment happens in the mind. Our mind tells stories. Our body gives us information. It's kind of like the difference between fake news and real news, to use a pop culture reference here in the US. So divine discernment is about being able to connect with your body's senses to communicate true and real information with you, similar to what I was saying earlier about how, the divine, how that energy of the universe or God or source or creator, however it is that you relate to that, communicates with us. That's discernment. So when we can feel into our discernment, we know when we're a yes for something, a no for something, something is true for us, we want to do something, we don't want to do with something. And I'll talk about that a little more later on and also in depth in next week's episode. Then there's responsible reprogramming. Okay? Because we have all of this faulty, unhelpful, and harmful programming and conditioning just by nature of growing up in this culture, we want to deconstruct that, but then reprogram, right? Like it's one thing to shed the programming and conditioning, but then what is the actual new program that we want to upload? It's not much different from when if your computer were to get a virus, you'd want to delete the virus, right? And then upload the appropriate software. So what is responsible reprogramming? It's not taking on too much at once, so taking your time and really integrating. It's being mindful of your traumas and your wounds. It's not pushing through to get a result. And I'll give you my own personal example of this. Many of you, again, who listen to the podcast regularly know that essentially for about 2 years, I was in a super deep healing process after a very traumatizing romantic relationship. There was emotional abuse. My former partner was very narcissistic. I was bringing my own codependency and overfunctioning into the mix. So it was a cocktail of a lot of things that really needed to be unpacked and healed. So I thought after a full year of healing in 2017 that I'd be ready to hit the ground running in 2018. So I tried to do that. And the result was needing to take even more space to continue and deepen my healing most of this year. Now, I need to pause here and address something because space is a privilege. Real integration requires rest and space, and everyone's life and schedules are different. So this is also why this is called responsible reprogramming, because it factors in what are the true conditions of your life? What do you have time and space for, and what do you not? Your availability to rest and integrate might mean that, your journey might take a little longer for you if you don't have a lot of space or time in your schedule. But that's not a bad thing. And it doesn't mean that you are not going to eventually have the same results if you had more space. Your timeline is just going to look a little bit different. Because intentional rest and integration goes a long way. And everyone's process is different. Not everyone needs as much time and space anyway. So there's a lot of variables in there. So no matter how much space you have available to you, it's good to take it when you have it or can get it. And so what do I mean by intentional rest or integration? It's self-sanctioned. It's rest that you luxuriate in, even though it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. It's rest that you don't feel guilty taking because you know you need it, because guilty rest is barely even rest at all. You need rest, you deserve rest, you should take it when it's available. And here's the caveat. Often when we don't rest, again, in whatever chunk of time is available to us any given time in our lives, depending on what's going on, life will find a way to make you rest. That usually looks like injury or illness, and that's never fun. a common example I especially hear from our listenership are really busy, over-functioning women who end up with autoimmune stuff, whether it's a thyroid issue, why am I blanking on what it's called? Adrenal fatigue, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, stuff like that. That's life making you rest in a lot of cases. For all the times and all the ways that you don't take the rest that is available to you. And again, that's just one way it can express. I'm not victim blaming over here. I'm not being like, listen, because you have a hard life, you're going to have things that are wrong with you. That's not necessarily the case. But it's about leveraging the time and space that you do have to make the most of it so that life doesn't have to come along and whoop you with a cosmic 2x4. So I really want to make sure you get the difference. The cosmic 2x4, when life kind of forces you to rest, is when you have some time and space available to you, no matter how limited or ample it is, and you don't take it. That's kind of self-punishing. And that's when life will come along and be like, all right, well, you had the choice, and now you don't. And we don't like that. We never want to get there. And so this is not self-indulgent, it's self-caring. There's an Audre Lorde quote. Audre Lorde, if you aren't familiar, is a poet, writer, and civil rights activist. And this was something she wrote: caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. I love that. And this also speaks to deep committed practice because it's showing up and showing up and showing up over and over again over time, which in a lot of cases, in terms of this quote, referring to political warfare, in a culture that really benefits from you staying scared and small and dependent and feeling powerless or helpless, you not empowering yourself really benefits the culture, which is why you making these choices that will be nourishing and empowering and enlivening for you and help connect you to your love and your truth and your power. Those things are an act of political warfare. So deep committed practice might sound and feel like it takes longer, but because it's much more reliable and effective, it actually saves you time in the long term because you're not just grazing and snacking, to use a metaphor, on self-help and spirituality and or running the much higher risk of re-traumatizing yourself in poorly held containers with inconsistent methods. Now, I'm all about experimentation, right? Often we have to try things out to see what works for us before we can commit to a deep practice. But when we experiment and try things out, where the deep practice comes in there is we have to stick with something long enough to get a result. And that's usually longer than we feel like sticking with something because it's usually when resistance starts to pop up or self-sabotage that we want to hit the eject button and be like, this doesn't work, or this isn't for me. So let's talk about the difference here. It's not usually until we can say with certainty that something is or isn't for us. That's more divine discernment. This is the distinction between resonance, dissonance, and resistance. And again, I'm going to bookmark that for episode 3, so stay tuned till next week for a deeper dive into that. But basically, there are times when something straight up, we know it's for us and we know that we're just being challenged. And so we keep going. There are times when we reach a point and we're like, nah, this actually isn't for me. No, not for me. And of course, the resonance piece is when we're like, oh yeah, it's like there's not resistance. When we're really resonating is when there's not any resistance. So let's talk about the ideology that if it doesn't feel good, you shouldn't be doing it. Or to only pursue things that make you feel the way you want to feel. The reason this is flawed is because on the way to feeling how you want to feel, there are hella feelings you might not want to feel. My personal experience is this. I had to feel a ton of grief, anger, resentment, betrayal, disappointment, fear, sometimes anxiety, to get to be a mostly joyful, fulfilled, expressed, connected person that I enjoy being like 98% of the time now. And I could argue that who I am now is 35 years in the making, or I could say it's about a decade, because that's when I started doing self-development work consciously and intentionally. I could even track it back to 13 years ago when I started discovering self-help books, but didn't really know how to apply them and wasn't super focused on it yet. Regardless, the real core message here, and I'll end on this, is that the most powerful, connected, aligned versions of ourselves take time to cultivate. They require deep, committed practice because we've all got the goods. Remember, the core message of everything I do here is that everything you've ever needed has always been inside of you. We've also, though, got tons of programming and conditioning telling us that our goods aren't the goods and that we should want other things and bend, twist, and pretzel ourselves to meet the external expectations. So I'm here to help us all capitalize on and express the deep inner truth and the love and the possibility that the wisest parts of us know are real. All right, everyone. Again, this is episode number 282. You can find the show notes at untameyourself.com/282. The reflection questions, if you want to take this into your journal or come on into our Facebook group, are: what is your current relationship to deep committed practice? Where in your life have you been avoiding deep committed practice, whether that's intentionally or unintentionally? What impact has not having a deep committed practice had on your life? How do you think a deep committed practice could benefit your life right now? And these are framed as reflection questions because likely what I talked about in this episode has sparked some insight for you to go deeper with. So you can join the free pop-up Facebook group that accompanies this series to get some more time with me and other podcast listeners. Share your reflections and more at wildsoulmovement.com/popupfb. And a reminder again, if you're listening on Monday, November 26th, that you could save $50 on Wild Soul Movement Weekend workshops when you sign up by the end of the day today and use the code THANKFUL in all lowercase lessons. That's over at wildsoulmovement.com/workshops. And you can also save $111 on the new Power year-long circle experience for women and women-identifying folks, which starts on January 3rd. That's over at wildsoulmovement.com/power 2019. And after today, registration will be closed until we officially open it up again on December 3rd. So it's not going away. It'll open up back up on December 3rd. And the bonuses this year are amazing. I've seen a lot of programs people run where the bonuses are just like a bunch of extra shit that just feels overwhelming. I really went out of my way to design bonuses that will enhance and deepen the experience. Speaking of deep committed practice, right? Give you some more layers to explore if you want to. Some of those look like monthly new moon circles, 12 guest mentor interviews. By the way, some of whom have been your favorite podcast guests, like Lauren Alta, Evian Whitney, Rachel Maddox, Shanda Catrice, Barry Tesler, and more. Also, some of them are my personal friends and even my own personal healer. So it's an amazing mix. Very, very excited about that. Again, all those details are at wildsoulmovement.com/power 2019. That's wildsoulmovement.com/power 2019. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you share it up with your friends and family or whoever you think might dig it as well. And we'll see you next week for episode number 283 and the third installment in this 6-week Journey into the Wild Soul series. Thanks. You were saying something about that tall poppy syndrome. What is that, if anyone listening doesn't know?
So it's really, it's part of the vernacular in Australian society, and I think the United Kingdom. It's really that experience of being too tall, too much, too beautiful, too brilliant, too. And you need to get cut down to size, sugar. You need to get cut down to size. And it's very visceral, and it's, and I have days of things that I want to say about that because it is so extremely painful to experience it. And I think even more painful is that unconsciously we've contributed to it. So I think about this in the context of, I talk about we canonize people and then we dehumanize people, right? Ooh. So we do this like kind of like bell curve of, putting people up on a pedestal. And then when they start to zig when we want them to zag, we cut them down, we demonize them. And again, it's pretty unconscious. And I think it's like I can feel it in my chest as I say, I think this is one of the biggest reasons people are afraid of success, because they have, ancient recollections of having this happen to them, and they've seen where they've participated in it too.